Okay, hello everyone. We are beginning this webinar this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are streaming in from. Welcome. This particular seminar, as you can see on the title here, is called Dual Brand Reputation Approach, a more effective and efficient path to brand protection for medium-sized manufacturers and brand owners. I am Justin Pierce, a partner here at Venable. I'll also be joined in this presentation by William Mansfield from Emergent IP Consulting. Just waiting momentarily as more people are coming in, and we'll go and get this kicked off within the next couple of seconds here.
It's so popular, we've had to delay closing the doors.
That's
one of the most difficult things in life.
All right, let's go to the next slide here. So we'll introduce ourselves. We've already kicked off the session. I spoke about it before. I am from Venable. I'm the co-chair of our IP department at Venable. In shorthand speak, that is just the head of our collection of practices that deal with intellectual property at the Venable firm. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. We have offices throughout the U.S. and work on a host of IP issues. One issue in particular that I'll highlight that I've worked on for over the past 20 years, both in-house and at the firm, is in the area of anti-counterfeiting and brand protection. I've worked on it both as outside counsel and also as a leader of a brand protection team at a major Fortune 500 company, and had experience in the US and throughout the world, including assignments in Asia, China in particular as well. I'll move on to my co-presenter, Bill Mansfield.
My name's William Mansfield. I, as you'll notice, now have a beard, of which I am terribly proud. I have kind of risen up in over 25 years in brand protection. Started as an undercover investigator, worked my way up, got a law degree, built brand protection programs for other companies, conducted a lot of sting operations, raids, facilitated arrests, those sorts of things at every stage. Then went in-house at Abro, ABRO, a small company that most Americans haven't heard of, but has extensive sales around the world. And so a lot of my work over that last 15 years has been in foreign countries. I've been to 59 now, I think. I have to update this, and handle brand protection matters in them. And one thing along the way, I got an MBA because I really became fascinated with that. How do you center brand protection, especially in IP in general, within a company? Where does it fit? How does it serve the overall company goals? And how do you make it as seamless as possible? Really fascinating me. So one thing Justin and I both have in common, we're pretty different. We were once described as a thoroughbred and a bulldog. But we were both in the Army, although we were in different spheres in the Army. Justin is a West Pointer and an officer, and I was literally the opposite of that, very bottom of the grunt barrel. But and I think that gives us a lot of coverage and different points of view that come together really nicely.
Yeah, great intro. I will say this about our shared background. Bill and I have probably worked in the brand protection space together since the early 2000s. Obviously, he's mentioned the military background. That actually informs a lot of what we're about to go into today in terms of just how we coach, how we guide, how we consult, how we provide advice to clients who are in the space. Both of us have been in-house. Both have a lot of on-the-ground experience in very tough or non-standard situations. And it comes out in our advice that's really practical and helps companies deal with tough or, frankly, sometimes embarrassing situations. So with that,
neither of us tends to want to roll around in the theoretical or the, in the kind of noodly minutia that lawyers sometimes get caught in. Both of us are about, how does this actually affect the business? How does this affect the reality on the ground?
Yep. All right, let's go to the next slide. So today, where we'll start here in our first couple of slides is sort of this particular presentation is really born out of a paper that the two of us co-wrote. really encapsulates a lot of our philosophy and a lot of thinking that we've provided to clients and companies over the years. We pick in particular mid-sized companies because they're often at an interesting crux in the road where on the one side, like many in-house counsel will say, look, we don't have unlimited resources, but we have to deal with problems that kill our margins or kill a particular part of our business. On the other hand, many companies that are in the mid-size range will have sophisticated in-house counsel, but maybe not the type of team and the type of resources to deal with some of the depths of the problems that are out there. The approach we pitch really is informed also because we've been in the industry for a while. And we've seen a lot of experts hawking all types of different solutions, but they're often not good because they're either one size fits all or they're only one small segment of what you need to do to comprehensively deal with an issue.
Yeah, they're tools, but they're presented as solutions or answers. And that doesn't mean, and what we look at here, for example, we look at kind of removing listings is a really common one. And it makes sense that that is a big player in the industry. That brings you something that's easy to do kind of from your desk, that creates a lot of what I call comfortable metrics. We took 10,000 illegal listings down today. Sounds good, but those listings are immediately put back up and don't actually impact the behavior of the counterfeiter. And so I think a lot of, especially at that middle level, which is really the most interesting um, area for me, they can get into a situation where they're spending a lot of money and it's not getting them the results. It's literally better than doing nothing, but it's not getting them the results. And we've seen that time and time again. And we think we put together an argument for why that is and how to do better.
Yeah. And
We
before
also talked about, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and before we leave this slide, just to hit it and make this point really clear, is that obviously we've seen a lot of people take what we call the standard approach. It just doesn't work because in many cases it might over rely sometimes on online or technical solutions that are just based on simply delisting things. Our point here is that delisting in and of itself doesn't equal an anti-counterfeiting program.
Yeah.
Also, surprise, surprise, even though we're lawyers, lawsuits are not always the right and most effective tool to use in the strategies. But the point is, I think a lot of people ask us, and we deal with this conversation all the time. Well, hey, why do people keep doing what doesn't work? Or here, I'm hearing I should do this and do that. It's often born out of just culture and habit in our industry. And oftentimes, when people do start getting serious, when I say people, I mean corporate entities of all sizes, the focus tends to be on activity metrics. How busy can we do? How many actions are we taking in this way? How many delistings are we doing? As opposed to focusing a program around impact metrics.
Right.
So,
And
so with
and we
that,
think
go to the
in
next
the end,
slide.
yeah, and minimum level companies really can't afford to waste any of that money. So this is our approach, is the dual brand reputation approach. You click through and find our paper. Um, and when we talked, Justin and I, we really developed this thing that the core concept is that any brand or business company has two reputations. One is the one we're all aware of. How are you seen in the marketplace? Which a trademark to some extent sums up and is meant to symbolize. But another one, and just as important, is what do the counterfeiters think of you? Counterfeiters are an industry. They don't get together in Vegas once a year and wear lanyards, but they're an industry. They talk to each other. And within that industry, and I've encountered this in undercover work again and again and again, people talk and people know what brands can fight well and what brands can't. And they target the brands that can't. They're rational business actors who are looking to maximize their profits. And so the end goal, because step one, develop a clear and achievable goal. The goal is to be known in that industry, to have a brand reputation as somebody that can fight and fight well. And counterfeiters won't even come to you. That's when, with the company Abro, we won when an undercover at a trade show was talking to a known counterfeiter who was naming all the different brands similar that they could counterfeit, didn't name ours. And the undercover said, well, why not this one? Because we're well known. And they said, oh, you don't want to mess with those people. That's your victory. That's your goal right there. Then you Need to have a rational understanding what motivates counterfeiters. Too often, people kind of make them into supervillains, or they're out to destroy the company, or they make them into um, kind of chaotic mess. They're rational business actors who very much want to make a profit. And if you can impact that, then you can steer them away from you. Now, I don't know what else they're going to do. They're crooks. Maybe they'll go be crooks somewhere else, but they're not stealing from you, and that's key. And then you have to implement effective tactics. And we're pretty ruthless on judging what tactics have an effect and what tactics don't. And I think you have to be, because there are lots of things you can do, but that doesn't mean all those things have the same impact. And with a limited budget, you have to prioritize what's actually having the impact.
Yeah, it's sort of the last point I'll make here, but not least before we leave this. Really, the key element here of this dual brand reputation approach is what we're really trying to do is retool companies, in-house legal departments, strategy departments. We're almost all, just based on the nature of all those who are in the audience today, very attuned on IP 101 and sort of what basics to do. You're very attuned about marketing and sales and advertising and how to maintain the brand in the mind of the consumer. The one area we find is generally a weakness with those companies, to build a story, and I've got plenty of them. The companies that don't have a reputation with the bad guys or the counterfeiters, it's largely because you haven't thought of it, and it hasn't been something that's just been thought about it from a strategic standpoint and then implemented in your actual strategy and tactics. So with
And I
that,
guess
let's
we
go
should
to the
say
next.
this webinar is not IP 101. We know you're all smart people. Well, you didn't get here your first day. If you're looking at this, you understand IP, you understand what a trademark is, stuff like that. We're intending to take you into a deeper level of thinking about your approach to brand protection, which is a narrow subset of a subset, but very important. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
All right, so I talked about the goal and the counterfeiters in the industry. Here we want to, on step two, though, I think we looked at this idea of a profit effort risk analysis. The counterfeiters are rational business actors, right? They're crooked, they're crooks, but they do business. Lord knows we don't have any of those we could think of. And they're going to look at how much can I make, what effort do I have to put in, and how much risk is there? And that's similar to what a legitimate business actor would consider. But a risk is the key difference. Here we're talking about negative things that can happen to them, which include jail, arrest, seizure, both equipment and materials, all these other things. If you want to make people less likely to steal from you, you just need to move one of these variables. Now, the most effective one to move is that risk variable. And you don't have to make counterfeiting your product or brand completely unprofitable. You just have to make it less profitable than the other things they're doing to make money, legally or illegally. And they will, as rational business actors, they face opportunity costs as well. They will steer away from you and steer into those things. And so our take is very pragmatic. You're not trying to make them perfect people. You're just trying to make them not steal from you.
Let's go to the next slide.
Next slide.
Okay,
So
so
go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say what I'll do here. We'll mix this one up. Just step three is important. Obviously, we talked about this being a three-step overall. We're giving broad strokes from the paper, obviously, but when it comes to implementing effective tactics, we've divided into what works and what doesn't work. What we're really getting at, and it's most important here, is looking at things from the counterfeiter's point of view. You'll see some other bullets here, and these are things that relate to getting to the source, getting to that behavior that we just talked about that's implicated in that PER, profit effort risk analysis. If you're aiming all the time for criminal penalties, if you're engaging with the right level of law enforcement, if you're always looking for seizure of the machinery or the equipment that is used to make counterfeits. This even happens in the digital world. If I take it out of physical, same kind of thing. If you're looking at seizing the apparatus by which someone uses to conduct their illicit business, you're upping the risk for them significantly. Working with customs, all this are different ways of getting to the source. What doesn't work, we probably intimated this through some of our earlier slides, but it's things that relate to whack-a-mole, where you focus on activity metrics or how busy you are, how many sheer delistings you're doing, things where you're fighting the smoke instead of the fire.
Yeah,
And
you're waving your
also,
arms around,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
creating a
go ahead.
little bit of space, but the fire is still going. And this is a lot of what's currently kind of sold throughout the industry as brand protection, are things that are fighting the smoke. They're fighting the irritant closest to you, the thing that the reason that your boss or the board or a customer is calling up and complaining about. And I get why that's annoying, and you have to take steps to address those. But if you don't go to the source and put out the fire, if you don't go as deep into that illicit supply chain as possible and really do some damage, that smoke's never going to stop coming. And the current brand protection world has a lot of fans, throwing a lot of fans to wave around the smoke. And the frankly more difficult, more interesting work of putting out that fire, which is the long term way you win, is not as well known or understood. And yeah, in this we go through several different things of what can work in that. How do you make this overall idea that what you're doing is changing the counterfeiters' behavior, hitting them in such a way that they just stop stealing from you? Because I've never met a counterfeiter that specializes. If they're stealing from you, they're stealing from 20 other brands. There's no cost to them. They're not paying a license, royalty, or anything else in diversity. So they're stealing from 20 other brands. And really early on, I realized, okay, my job is to make them steal from 19 starting tomorrow. And the way you do that is to be the one person that can do something different that really makes a dollar impact on that or raises that risk for him. So if you can go and put somebody in jail and nobody else can, and I put at this point well over 100 people in jail, uh, all of a sudden you are a different class. You have a different brand reputation with the counterfeiters. And that's where you really win. That's a long term solution.
That brings us to the last point, when to sue. More often than not, it's probably not always effective to sue. There certainly are times where you have a high probability of recovering money, freezing particularized accounts that you know are responsible for a high volume, let's say high quality counterfeits. Oftentimes, suit might be appropriate if there's discovery that could be really valuable that you can get through that, in addition to some type of reward. But remember, much of what happens in the world of counterfeiting and international brand protection really is international, and a lot of
Right.
it is not happening in the US. So while there certainly are certain specialized types of litigation that can happen in the US to recover some money, you're always almost better off and more efficient to go after it at the source. So
Yeah.
let's go to the
Both
next
Justin and I have encountered people that pitch kind of filing a lawsuit with that get you a judgment that's uncollectible. Well, that's usually of no value. There are weird situations where it can be, but we start with the assumption of what's actually going to hit that source point, and very often that's not a lawsuit.
Right, right. And more often than not, a lot of the lawsuits that you do see in the news, there's some spectacular judgments at time. Very good to do. They certainly will check the block of you having defended your brand. But when you go back and do the analysis as to what percentage actually collected on that judgment, it's usually a fraction, a small fraction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we now take this sort of things that we've been talking about in terms of the approach and the strategy, and we'll spend the rest of the time on applying this to sort of real life applications and real life scenarios that we cover in the next few slides. The goal here is not to be exhaustive or to give you a list of every single possible outcome, but just to give you a sense of some of the key things where we've seen multiple different companies and clients either have issues with, whether it's good or bad, but we kind of distill it in these various scenarios that we'll not go over and give you the takeaway for each scenario. So the first, it's one near and dear to Bill. It relates to an ongoing case that he has for a company that we cannot currently state, but it's a anonymous company right now in the apparel industry. And we'll have him talk through this from the standpoint of why it's important to have systemic and proactive investigations.
Yeah. So this company found out that there were people online that were selling high quality fake, which is kind of a nightmare situation. And these fakes were coming out of a foreign country. We conducted solid investigation, and I think a lot of cases, even that go to suit are won and lost in the investigation phase, especially when you're dealing in nations that don't have strong discovery rules. You really got to get that information before they know you're onto them. We did really solid investigation work, a lot of controlled purchases, used the information that came out of that when they didn't know they were under investigation to build a full picture of that illicit supply chain, which is key. And then now we're moving into the period where we go to the authorities. And there is more an art than a science in getting overworked, under resourced kind of bureaucrats at the right level to agree to take your case seriously, especially if it's outside of your home country. And that's, you've got to be able to tell your story and make it seem compelling. And we're doing that and getting them, they're agreed to take action because these people inevitably, in all my work, I've seen, uh, tend to be there in that job for a reason. They believe in law and order. They believe in their country's economic future, and it's not well served by counterfeits. And the mix of now we're starting kind of those police adjacent investigations because they want, depending on the country, some input or control of it. And that's a whole process. And then eventually this will hopefully work out to raids and arrests. I love an arrest. There's nothing better than a mugshot, and it changes you from something that's just a cost of doing business. Occasionally, you're going to have a shipment seized, or they're going to shut down one of your online sellers in America. Well, what are you going to do? You find there are millions of them, but even a relatively small amount of jail time is not an acceptable cost of doing business to almost every counterfeiter I've ever met. Because again, they've got 19 other brands that they can steal from and not face arrest. So it's a really easy, rational decision to leave you. I would also point out when you're doing seizures, you always want to try and get the seizure and destruction of the equipment, like Justin was saying. And a lot of people don't think about that. They just want to, or the packaging. A lot of people don't think about that. You have to approach it, and this is kind of key to a lot of our thinking, from the counterfeiter point of view. What would make it difficult for them and just make it cost too much to be worthwhile? And this a consistent investigation process that brings together key information before they know you're after them is key. I've seen lots of people they get find one thing, they're immediately sending a cease and desist letter to a foreign country where it's going to have no impact except to let the bad guys know that now you know about them. What are you doing? You got to think about it from that other point of view.
Yeah.
Justin and
Yeah, I'll add a couple points. Thanks, Bill. That relate to this, just in terms of different cases that we either have ongoing or some that we've recently seen concluded that were successful. The bullet points here hit the highlights of sort of what you need to do and the ingredients to get success when you do systemic, investigation. One piece that I'll mention on the U.S. side that's super important is to be doing this regularly. And what I mean by doing this, whether it's, on one end, sometimes people call it mystery shopping. Other people might call it quality control measures, but always be out there in the different medium where your consumers or audience are purchasing things and having some budget set aside so that you systematically do test purchases. Over a period of time, you can't boil the ocean or chase every counterfeit, but you'll pick up enough data that's gleaned to give you an idea as to the ports of shipment, looking at different invoices, and build up a database on the diverted products or counterfeit products that you find. That'll often lead you, particularly over a period of time, as you gather that data, to likely sources of where most of your counterfeit threat is coming from. Obviously, on the retail end, if you're in the US, consumers will see thousands of different places. In reality, they're often coming from, I could think of a case right now, from two factories in one province in one country. And so over time, gathering up that data leads you to that source. Now, that's the US side at one end. On the source side, on the on-ground investigation, the other area I'd recommend for companies with limited budget, if you're thinking about where's my money best spent, is it on running around doing technological solutions or filing lawsuits in the US? Your money's best spent once you have that data on getting high quality investigators in country to help develop and set up the platform for what Bill just described.
On the ground, as close to the source as possible. But one thing that comes up is once you start investing, look, counterfeiters, it's not like they violate trademark laws and everything else they're law abiding. They guarantee they're not paying their taxes. I guarantee they're not following health and safety issues, labor laws, stuff like that. Sometimes you work the case, you bring it to the authorities' attention, and the authorities go at them for something else. That's fine. Capone died in prison because of tax evasion. Whatever, as long as they know you're the source of their pain, leaving you alone is the way to fix that pain. That's your real goal. So once you go in there, having an investigator with kind of a wide range of experience and the ability to think beyond just a very narrow subset of legal issues is absolutely important.
That brings us to our next slide. So with this is really a key area that we remiss if we didn't include. One scenario that we see all the time, it kind of relates to why we were saying we believe based on this audience that you all are sort of beyond IP 101. That being said, 80% of the companies that I deal with, even that are pretty sophisticated, part of their brand protection problem stems from the fact that their IP portfolio may not, in fact, cover their key markets and key areas of manufacturing, as simple as that may sound. But just having that set up, and number two, having some form of global monitoring is super important. Otherwise, in reality, how else are you going to allocate resources and focus on what may be your key markets? And sometimes that changes for different companies, depending on what happens with your supply chain. But the bottom line is to periodically make sure your portfolio, in terms of its protection and obviously your ability to leverage against that, matches up with where your key markets for manufacturer and marketing and distribution are.
I think it's also valuable to understand the counterfeiting point of view again and look at, because there are companies that manufacture in America, sell in America. That's what they're doing. They're just an American company selling in America. That is not where the counterfeits are coming from. The counterfeits are probably going to be made overseas. But they think, well, I'm American. I only have to care about America. You can ignore the counterfeiters, but the counterfeiters aren't going to ignore you. So you need to have an understanding of what that illicit supply chain is, where it's based out of, where its key transportation nodes are, so that you can fight them. So I know companies that any trademark they register in the US, they automatically register in China as well, because the counterfeiters in their case come out of China. And so they instantly, they're looking at it beyond just what we want. They're also looking at what do the counterfeiters want? What are the counterfeiters working at? And I think you've got to keep that in mind. Sometimes their counterfeiters are described as, you have to treat them as kind of an illicit competitor. And they are. You have to think of them even when you'd rather not. That's just the reality of the modern manufacturing system. It's inherently global. It's very easy to set up in one country, manufacture in another, ship through a third, sell in a fourth, not be in any of them. And it makes it more complicated, more difficult. But the answer is to create more sophisticated responses, not just to, well, this is what's easiest to do, or this is what, the big boys are offering. This is what I can pay them for. So you can fight and win, but it's tougher than it used to be.
Let's go to the next slide. So continuing with this theme on focusing on key markets and area manufacturer, we've talked a little bit before about the importance of using, trusted and vetted local investigators. Both Bill and I have had experience with investigators that are less than scrupulous. And that happens oftentimes because of two reasons. One, a lot of companies, because they are short on budget, or they sometimes, unfortunately, don't allocate enough budget to sort of global brand protection, tend to do what I call fire and forget brand protection. They might hire one local law firm, that firm then goes out, contracts with investigators. They kind of handle everything, so you get one bill. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. There's been some very interesting news stories over the past decade or so about how there's a lot of investigator fraud. People who may gin up fake reports, and maybe even a raid is conducted, nice pictures are sent back to you, you get a bill, but in reality, not much happened. or that's the same raid that 10 other brands got, and it's the same 10 products laid out different ways. There's a lot of different variations of this where, just like the counterfeiters, think about it, the investigators on the ground know in many countries if a company is serious or not about brand protection. And they can tell
Yeah.
when they compare your company to others, who's checking on them locally, how much, what you're asking for. One of the things that Bill and I and other providers like us offer really is a trusted and vetted list of people who've been on the ground with us around the world and who actually do what they're supposed to. That's worth its weight in gold. There's a lot of room for fraud in this area, and it's something that just about every company has to deal with, particularly as you get bigger and more global.
I have my own brand reputation with the investigators because my whole job is to go around the world and people in foreign prisons. The major part of my job. Nobody steals from me. Not for well over 20 years because one person tried it and they're not happy. So but if you walk in a babe in the woods and try and deal with these things can go wrong. I think key is having somebody you trust that can go up on the ground that shows up at raids. You have to be what trust but verify. I'm kind of a verify, and still I don't trust anybody. But yeah, I think it's a hard world, but you can operate in it. And then
Right.
once you get this world, you know, raids, fines, seizure, all this stuff, you want to go as hard as possible. This isn't for the weak of heart. These people are out to steal from you and to ruin your company. You know, it's personal. That's why you can get rid of them, like just making it too unpleasant to do it. But you have to be. I often say, and a lot of companies will be like, "We're too small to be able to." I think your effectiveness is not bend, but seriousness. If you take this seriously, if you make it part, if you're doing this intentionally, you can have a big impact, even without a giant spend. And Justin and I both know giant companies with giant spends that don't spend it in a very smart way and don't get very good results. This is something you can control, but it's got to be a priority.
Good point. Let's go to the next slide. So here's another scenario that comes up a lot today, and some of this is born by just the proliferation of what's happening with e-commerce and the reality of how much all of us have continued to shop and shop more and more as the stats show. We all see it in our personal lives through various e-commerce platforms. What's interesting under the law, without getting too deep into the weeds, is there's a de minimis loophole, and it's really abused by counterfeiters. What do we mean by that? Currently, what we're talking about is that small packages or small packages that have a retail value roughly of less than $800 qualify for what's called the de minimis exception. That means they're not subject to a whole lot of scrutiny at all or much of anything going through customs. They're in small packages that, look, they're in a rush to get to you through the various different overnight couriers that we all know and use. What does that mean? Over the past decade or so, you've had about 140 million of those packages coming through to now, most recently, over a billion. That's huge. It's a big loophole that the counterfeiters abuse, and they're driving a truck through. Most of you all who represent brands that provide any kind of physical product, for the most part, they're small products that can be shipped in some way. So obviously, those products get to people, whether they're counterfeits, whether they're dupes, whether they're substandard copies, you name every variant diverted product. There's a lot of things that get through because of this de minimis challenge, and we go into a little bit of what to do about that in the next slide here. So we apply our three-step process, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Yeah, again, you want to say, okay, well, what's the counterfeiter's point of view is, and how do I make them stop this? They're gonna send these in a million little packages. Customs can't look at all them. I can't stop them all. The reality is you can spend a lot of time and effort, again, fighting the smoke of this. Whereas if you use them not as individual problems, but as lead or a source point, when you track them back, which you can do, and get to the source point, and if that source point hard, that makes a difference. Now you're changing the way that source point counterfeiter looks at you as a brand, what they're afraid of, and what they're willing to do. So every now and then the approach for the de minimis and for small parcel stuff is kind of, well, we just got to keep demanding customs do a better job. It's not a solvable problem. That's just an immense amount of stuff, but it's coming from one or two or three places. Find those places and hit those places hard in a way that they're not suspecting. They're not expecting, and all of a sudden that's a completely different world for you. But you have to have people that know how to work this, know how to bring it back. But these people are available, and this is a doable thing. But
Right.
you have to, again, put out the fire. Don't worry about the smoke.
So one example I'll give you all of sort of how this is done, and one company that I've seen do this well will go unnamed. But you remember the story earlier about Bill being an investigator, working with investigators on the ground, and being at a show. If you're involved in systemic investigation and intelligence gathering, one company in particular, periodically, let's say on a quarterly basis, is not only doing test buys, but they're getting input from people who are posing as buyers and sellers on the ground. Quarterly, that's all going into a database or an engine, and they're getting tips on who's hot, who's not, who's got the products that everyone's buying on a particular social media channel, and what's the best way to distribute those. And what's interesting is that company then looks at constantly in its industry, where are the hot retail outlets online, what are the hot products or features, and they use that then so that they're not just spending a ton of money on test buys all the time. They're using that information to actually inform what they're
Right.
buying on a quarterly basis for test buys. They're looking at social media intel. What's everyone chattering about in terms of the latest and greatest place or the right link to go through and get a particular product or piece of apparel or software, or hey, this particular leather pocketbook is great, but whatever it is, it can be applied to that. And they're using that to kind of follow in our very dynamic world what's popular in terms of dupes, what's a top popular in terms of knockoff. They're then buying those periodically, taking that data, and they're not going after everybody, but they're going after those who are high priority that meet a certain set of criteria. And they're doing that on a regular basis. So again, you're not going after every de minimis shipment, but you're using
Right.
certain criteria and tactics to figure out what's the highest priority out of what we know is being knocked off. And let's regularly go after two or three per quarter and do it systematically.
Yeah, to develop that key brand reputation, you have to have a systemic fight. This has to be built in an intentional thing long term. You have to be a company that recognizes that your brand has great value and it's key to your future and that it's worth protecting. And that's not just, well, if something pops up, we react to it. No, that's a built-in process. It's very intentional. That's going to look at and say, well, where are the risks and how do we do this? And as they move over time, we'll move as well. I think one of the great mistakes brands make is kind of assuming that counterfeiters are static, that if they do something, then what are the counterfeiters going to do? This is really common with tech solutions. I've been in the industry long enough. I remember when hologram stickers were going to end counterfeiting. We'll put a hologram sticker on our product, and then what are the counterfeiters going to do? And I said, where are you getting these hologram stickers? They, oh, someplace in China. Well, the counterfeiters are just going to buy that, put it on theirs. Like these are rational business actors. They're going to respond. You have to be smarter than them, and you have to be more intentional than them. And if you're only doing kind of this, I'll respond when it blows up in my face. The results you're going to get are going to be minimal. But if you take this seriously and make this a part of your process, then that's going to lead to greater growth and greater sales in the future. This is it's hard to clarify the ROI, but it's very positive.
Yeah, and on that theme, one other note, it's the last bullet on this particular slide. We've got internal data that also highlights a particular issue. And different companies do this for different reasons. Some don't really want to talk about the issue of counterfeiting or any sort of diversion of goods. But I've seen in general, and it's not just anecdotal, it's based on internal data we have, that companies that actually take the extra step online and nowadays through interactive social media to actually provide resources on their products, to where to buy the legitimate products and some basic information. You may not obviously give away covert markings or things that you're using, letting investigators or law enforcement know to verify things, but going as far to say, hey, our products are only shipped from here and from here. They look like this or they look like that. Companies that take that additional step, and not everyone does it, different company cultures are different, but they typically do better in this space because they're taking that extra step to educate consumers. You're taking some air out of the sails of those who are going to play with the fact that consumers in this sort of jumbled online social media world aren't as educated about your product or what could be variants of your product than those brands who actually put out the information through authorized channels in terms of authorized channels of where to buy, or hey, here's what an actual product looks like, or when you order it, it's only coming from here.
Yeah,
Just
your
things that
customers
simple
know.
alone help.
Yeah, your customers know counterfeits exist. Like the days of pretending you had no every successful brand and every gonna be successful brand has counterfeits. That's part of being a successful brand now. So this old method of, well, we don't talk about counterfeiting because we don't want anybody to get the idea. They already know. You know, what they don't know is, are you fighting it? And are you taking their health and safety and their money seriously by helping to protect them? And that's what you can show.
Right. Let's go to the next slide here.
So our CLE code, I believe,
That's right. So let me say
which
the
is
CLE code. Many of
the
you all
secret code.
are in that market where you've got to get CLE code. So we have it here. It is brand 2024. I'll say it again, the word brand, then the numbers 2024. That's the CLE code.
Unbreakable CLE code. It's a deep level CLE code. Good
Right.
luck with that, hackers.
All right, great. So next, you've heard us talk about it a good bit, sort of what's happening in the online world and social media. Social media, unlike anything else in the world, is something that I think any of you all who deal with advertising compliance law, making sure your ads and the way people interact with you are things that you control that help your brand, but don't also violate the law. One of the areas that's sort of fraught with confusion is sort of how to work with social media influencers. And quite honestly, may surprise many of you all that counterfeiters have certainly figured out how to work with social media influencers. But we'll start with Bill, and then I'll fill in with a few findings, of our own.
Yeah, I mean, so you have authorized social media influencers who are there. They have some sort of partnership with your brand. Ideally, that needs to be a contractual partnership that clarifies things to make sure they don't accidentally or whatever get involved with the sale of anything unauthorized, whether it's they want to call it a dupe or a counterfeit or whatever. Then there are a lot of other influencers. They're not in a contractual relationship with you. That's fine. Some of them are going to talk about your brand. That's great, word of mouth. And some of them are going to offer various connections to be able to purchase items. Those are the ones you need to really have a look at to make sure that what's being offered is real. Now, they may or may not know, the actual influencer, about the authenticity of the item being offered, but they're a great source for tips. Again, a lot of things, people selling at trade shows, people offering stuff online, a lot of things that other practitioners, brand protection, see as well, get them kicked out of the trade show or get this taken down or whatever. It's not much of a victory. It's none of a victory in a lot of ways because they'll just get put back online. But you've lost a chance to get a tip or a clue or a lead into where's this stuff coming from. We always go back to that. How do I get as deep into the illicit supply chain as possible and create disruption that changes that profit, effort, risk calculation in a negative way for the counterfeiter? And social media is the same thing. If you go in there and work that good investigation work it backwards, find where it's coming from, you can have a real impact on that. You can also get a sense of there are going to be, and there are, social media influencers that are knowingly offering infringing product. In those cases, you can take action directly against them. The law's still in development. It's a complicated thing, but it's not impossible, and it certainly sends a message. And the key is, again, sending that message, developing that strong brand reputation as somebody that knows how to protect their mark and protect their brand. Justin, you got anything you want to say on that?
I do. So a couple real situations that are ongoing. So in one scenario, uh, you know, we have a company that works with a well-known influencer who's deep in a certain industry. He knows a lot about the supply chain in that, is popular for doing unboxing videos, knows this and that, not only about the product, but like competitor products and things like that, and is often approached by people with affiliate programs or they're hoping to partner with him in certain industries. What's interesting is not only are legitimate entities approaching him, as you would expect, but just most people forget, also illegitimate entities that are hoping to say, hey, well, we'll give you a 50% affiliate link and you can get 50% commission on this because they're just trying to seed the market and get more attention through thousands of different outlets, whether it's on a variety of different social media channels or through certain social media individuals. This particular person, because they really care about the brand, actually gave passed those tips along to the brand itself, which helped for more particularized brand protection. In other cases, quite on the negative side, we're certainly aware of how a lot of people now currently search for different counterfeit products, or more particularly, I think one of the biggest things that impacts certain brands today aren't direct counterfeits, but it's everything from diverted goods to substandard goods that might not have the brand on it, but look similar. So things that might be in what I'd call the knockoff or dupes world. But again, a product's a product. And if an influencer, who we use the term here, compromise, can make money off that distribution, provided you can show that they did this knowingly and knew that it wasn't something authorized. Not that a whole lot of brands push this right now, because I think it's still an area, frankly, that on the authorized side, many companies are scrambling trying to deal with. But this is the kind of thing that we think and actually have seen now with certain clients is exploding out there. And I think it's worth looking into at a minimum, if you're a company that's hoping to or currently marketing its products or hoping to sell more through channels that are influenced by social media.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where having a couple of trusted authorized influencers can be really helpful, especially if they're in connection with your brand protection team. So they know the proper reaction to getting a, hey, I sell knockoffs of this. Do you want to make more money? And so they know the proper response is, well, tell me more. And they tell not yes or no, tell me more. Also, knowing a point on knowing is the influencer knowingly doing it, that can be answered very easily in the investigation process. And I've been involved in that forever. And you'll be surprised at how many people will admit, under the right circumstance, to being involved in crime. Justin, we've got a question. Do we
Yes.
want to take that now or do we want to take that
Yeah,
later?
like I just saw that. So let's do this. Let's go to the next slide and I'm going to answer
Okay.
that question. Okay, so I'm going to answer the question here. We'll get into gray markets and parallel imports, but I actually say go to the next slide because naturally, when you're dealing with gray market and parallel imports, almost by definition, you're dealing with investigations, players, in particular distributors sometimes that are in markets other than yours. So naturally, this issue of FCPA and dealing with local law enforcement and investigators comes up. Yes, as we talked about before, with investigators, there are a lot of good ones. There's a lot of crooks, and there's a lot of stuff happening that's in between. For US companies and UK companies that have to follow the FCPA or any of the major anti-corruption statutes out there, the couple of ways, without getting totally into the weeds, that we advise our clients on this is we actually ourselves have some pretty good templates that work with our program with our key clients, where we will actually, as part of our overhaul of the brand protection system, or even people who have really good, well-oiled brand protection systems, we make sure there's agreements with the right type of FCPA provision or addendum on the agreement between that company or the local subsidiary of that company and whoever that third party investigator is, particularly if it's someone who is either a subcontractor from a law firm, or if you've gone out and even hired one of the best of breed investigators, you want to make sure that particular team, especially in countries that may be in regions where corruption is endemic or systematic, you want to make sure, even if you found somebody who's sort of like on our vetted list, that you still have this agreement that matches up with the sufficiency of the FCPA provisions or the UK anti-corruption laws, and have these folks sign what we call sort of an FCPA certificate as part of the agreement or statement of work that they have with you or your subsidiary. Doing that does two things. You got a paper contract with those people. Number two, it definitely ups the level of seriousness, and it gives someone, whether your local company or even you through the attorneys you work with, a good hard way to say, hey, here's the ground rules up front. You can't just pay people off to produce a raid somewhere over here that's fake. You've got to follow the right sort of guidelines that meet our company guidelines. And that's one of the best things you can go do. Is it 100%? All types of people still play games, but I will say this, in the undercover investigations that we work with and different third-party deals, when you go through the seriousness of making people sign FCPA, everyone down the chain, in particular your local people in other countries, take things much more seriously. Again, it matches with what Bill and I are talking about. What do
Yeah.
people on the ground think about your company? If somebody's
What are they
showing
gonna?
up, making people sign agreements, and you're getting to know people, figuring out who they are, their address and contact information, getting signatures and pictures and IDs, all of a sudden now you've upped the stakes. A lot of other companies, quite frankly, aren't doing that.
Well, I think this is one of the most interesting areas that shows the difference and commonality in Justin and my work because I do that. You want to have them on paper on it, but I make it personal. So most of the work I do is in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, places where business and personal are much more put together. I make it clear to them that if anybody does anything that gets me in trouble or my client in trouble, I will never, ever let it go. That I will be personally after them, and I will make sure they regret it. Uh, and because of my track record, I mean, people know that I'm not messing around. I think if you have somebody who's physically gets in front of them, who knows them, who meets them, gathers information about them, and has a history of not being stolen from or not being tricked and misused, that makes a world of difference. I don't have those problems because of it would not go well for them. But I do get all the paperwork stuff. I think you need both. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that does not happen. Um,
Gray markets and parallel imports. We got a few points up here. This is an interesting area, and I will tell you, it's interesting. A lot of times when we talk to clients who have important brands, and this again is whether you have sometimes physical goods, no matter what the good is, or even digital goods, I divide up the world in two areas. You'll have some people that will admit or acknowledge, or they're somewhere in that spectrum of saying, okay, well, we do have knockoffs or a counterfeit problem. Others, maybe it's not counterfeit, it's the type of product that would take too much work to truly copy identically, but there's a lot of playing around with packaging or trying to make things look like it's branded as such, or it's authentic goods that were meant for one market with one set of quality controls and ingredients or features, but it's being diverted somewhere else because of the price arbitrage. And that ends up being an issue as well.
yeah, the answer
Three
here
big points
is
here, and I
two
was going to turn
things.
it over to
Yeah.
Bill.
Sorry, the answer here is two things. I always step on people. I apologize. Answer is I get worked up. My answer here is two things. One, you have to have your documents in line. You have to have clarity in your agreement with them of what they are and are not allowed to do. You can't leave gray area. Two, you need to test them. You need to stress test them. You need to give them the opportunity through undercover investigators to do the right or the wrong thing. If they do the right thing, you're fine. There's no problem. If they do the wrong thing, now you're in a very, as long as your paperwork was in order, now you're in a position to sit down with them, show them evidence that they did the wrong thing, and reach a new understanding of what your relationship is from a very strong position. And I think it's really straightforward. But again, it's got to be consistent. You got to be checking. It can't be just, we heard something, we're going to look at this person. This has to be built in, but this is a very solvable problem if you take the right approach. Um, we're running low on time. Go to the
Yep.
next
So
one.
let's go to the next slide. One last point I'll mention on that stress test results or consequences. because of the proliferation of gray market goods and how many companies are impacted at some point by product diversion, naturally, many of you know, because of your positions, you've got to obviously work with marketing and have a good relationship with your network of distributors. But if you've got rock solid contracts that have the right type of audit provisions and where you've been up front, or maybe you've overhauled them and made it very clear that, hey, we do inspections, we do test buys or quality assurance, mystery shopper, whatever, and people know that and know that there actually are consequences, meaning that you're going to come back and either negotiate a harder deal or a better deal for you, or look for alternative distributors, or just look for some business angle. That cost becomes actualized for that gray market distributor. And the companies who do that, it shouldn't be a surprise, do a lot better in this department than those who don't.
So
So,
overall, this has been our approach. It tends to be rooted in practical realities, taking that counterfeiter's point of view and seeing what one reason I think I'm good at this is my father, man, he's passed on, but he's a good man. But we grew up pretty poor, and a lot of his friends were counterfeit. And I mean, they were good guys. They weren't murderers. They were just crooks. And so I grew up around these people. I know what crooks are like. And I think one problem is you get a bunch of law-abiding people who've never dealt with crooks in a room. They figure out kind of things that sound nice on paper, but maybe don't work in the real world. I think you got to get really practical about the reality to figure out what works and what doesn't, and how to make it consistently better and better and better. And
right.
Justin, do you want to talk about the war game?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of close this off, and Bill's sharing of the background and family there is actually real. Kind of relates even to sort of the work we've done together and how long we've interacted with one another. I love that sort of pit bull and thoroughbred, or some people have said the yin and yang of brand protection. But the bottom line is both of us have had a lot of on the ground experience with this in ways that are surprising. I think what we found with clients is they're shocked when things are revealed as to how different people are playing around with their brand in a variety of ways. It is super important. What I can't stress enough is what Bill said. We offer a service ourselves where we will sit down and go through, whether you want to call it sort of a brand protection wargaming workshop or sort of a real-time practice, but go through this process of stress testing your plans, or taking a look at what you're doing, working with the key group of your internal executives and management team, and wargaming out exactly how counterfeiters or some of the folks that we've dealt with on the ground around the world are going to play around with your brand, and then give you, in sort of a round by round exercise, opportunities to think through, vet, test, realign your plan. In that wargaming process, whether it's a 1 to 3 day session, depending on what we offer, gives people and gives companies in particular, especially mid-sized companies that are at that point where you've got a successful brand, but you're struggling with, like, where do I put my priority? How do I strategize? That wargaming process that we offer helps you develop and get to that level of depth and reality and resilience that you need to deal with protecting your brand.
Yeah, you will walk out of it with a clear understanding of how a counterfeiter sees your situation, where your real vulnerabilities are, and what you can do to shore them up and to address them. You come out of it with it's going to be painful, like all war gaming. And we both worked on war games in the military from two different ends. Some of us at the high level, and some of us out in the field sweating it out. But there's no better thing as a first step if you're wondering, well, I don't know, what do I want to do? That's the first step. Find out what your reality is and deal with it.
Right. So in conclusion,
Oh,
CLE code before we leave is brand 2024.
2024.
If you have questions or other items that you want to follow up with, please feel free to follow up with us by email, which are on this last slide. And we thank each and every one of you for your time today.
Thanks.
Thank you.